Of all the super heavy tank projects of Nazi Germany, the Maus and E-100 were the most advanced and the most realistic to complete. However, of the two, the E-100 was the more promising design, probably because it began development later when German engineers had gained a little more experience. Nevertheless, the E-100 was originally intended to replace the Maus project. Although this was reasonable in principle, it was no less pointless. With combat characteristics similar to those of the Maus, the tank was supposed to be technologically advanced enough for mass production.
Hello friends, welcome to the last Panzer, and today we will present the German super heavy tank E-100. On July 30th, 1943, engineers at Adlerwerke began work on this project. The E-100 was intended to become the most powerful and heaviest vehicle in the E-series, combining protection comparable to the Maus with good mobility. The tank's development turned out to be rather difficult. At the end of 1944, due to Germany's increasingly desperate situation, Hitler personally issued an order canceling the development and production of all super heavy tanks. Despite this, the employees at the Henschel factory continued working on the E-100 until the very end of the war.
By 1945, the hull and running gear of the E-100 had been completed, and several tests had already been carried out. However, the war was coming to an end, so the final trials were conducted in Great Britain after the vehicle had been captured and transported there by Allied forces. The layout of the E-100 followed the traditional German tank design, featuring a front-mounted transmission combined with a rear-mounted engine. The crew was to consist of 6 men: the commander, gunner, 2 loaders, radio operator, and driver. The planned weight of the E-100 was about 140 tons, while the goal was to provide protection comparable to that of the Maus. It was impossible to increase the thickness of the armor plates indefinitely, since doing so increased the vehicle's weight and reduced the amount of available space inside the hull. Therefore, many of the E-100's armor plates were mounted at an angle, making it possible to improve protection while keeping the weight lower.
The upper front hull plate was 200 millimeters thick and sloped at 60 degrees, giving it an effective thickness of about 300 millimeters. The lower front plate was also 200 millimeters thick and sloped at 50 degrees. This made the front of the hull practically invulnerable to the anti-tank guns of its time. The side armor reached 120 millimeters, and additional 65 to 75 millimeter side skirts protected the running gear from damage. The rear of the hull was also exceptionally well protected, featuring a 150 millimeter armor plate sloped at 50 degrees. Even the bottom and the roof of the hull had a respectable thickness of 80 millimeters. Initially, the engineers planned to install the turret from the Maus, but a different design was proposed later. The final version of the E-100 turret remains almost completely unknown, since neither drawings nor sketches have survived, and no prototype was ever built. It is only known that it was designed by Adlerwerke and featured sloped armor plates.
The planned main armament changed together with the different turret designs. At first, the tank was to be armed with a 128mm gun. Later, the engineers decided to install a 150mm gun, and the second turret was designed specifically for it. The suspension was redesigned, just like on the other tanks of the E-series. Instead of torsion bars, it used Belleville spring washers, which freed up space inside the hull, allowed the suspension to withstand greater loads, and made maintenance and repairs much easier, since replacing a road wheel no longer required removing numerous other wheels and dismantling nearly half of the running gear. Adlerwerke developed tracks that were 1 meter wide. With these tracks installed, the E-100 could not fit onto railway transport cars. Therefore, just as with the Tiger tank, narrower transport tracks had to be used during rail transport, and the outer row of road wheels, together with the side skirts, had to be removed. The planned engine was the 1,200 horsepower Maybach HL234, which was expected to propel the E-100 to a top speed of 40 kilometers per hour. However, production of this engine was never established before the end of the war. As a result, the trials were carried out using the 700 horsepower Maybach HL230, which was clearly insufficient for a 140-ton vehicle. During testing, the E-100 reached only 20 kilometers per hour and demonstrated extremely poor cross-country mobility. The promising German tank ultimately met a rather unfortunate fate. Unlike its competitor, the Maus, the E-100 offered lower weight, better protection, greater mobility, improved manufacturability, and the possibility of mounting more powerful armament. But would that have helped it in the war or not? What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments. In our humble opinion, the E-100 was nothing more than an interesting example of German tank engineering. Even if it had entered mass production, it could not have influenced the course of the war. The same can be said for Germany's other superweapon projects.